So this is going to be a critical review of the Zoom MS-50G from the perspective of a skeptic. Older digital tech gets a bit of a bad rep, but I figured I'd give this 10-year-old pedal a chance. Now, I was in the market for a chorus pedal, realised I could also probably benefit from a phaser, and then, as this thing often does, I rabbit holed into multi-effects units, which is where I found this guy. Now, this Zoom MS-50 is somewhat revered in the shoegaze crowd as sort of a Swiss army knife, a very underrated pedal. One thing I want to make clear up front is that this is not a sponsored video. I personally bought this pedal, and if it doesn't meet my standards, I will be returning it. So what first struck me about the Zoom MS-50 is that it was updated somewhat recently. The last update was in 2020, a whole 8 years after the initial launch. Now, this update actually gave me a lot of hope for the unit, as it's not usually the hardware that binds these digital pedals to the past, rather the software. Now, for the housekeeping in this demo, I'm using my Yamaha RS820, currently tuned to drop D. Time to get this pedal unboxed. Now, this unboxing experience was definitely one of the unboxing experiences of all time. Nothing fancy, just a pedal in a cardboard sleeve. After unboxing, I installed the latest firmware, and now we're ready to dive in. On screen, you'll see me dialing in a patch while I run through the specs. The Zoom MS-50G is a compact multi-effects unit, capable of running up to 6 effects simultaneously. You can store these effects chains in 50 different slots and recall them by assigning them to the foot switch. I do think that the extra small form factor plays a detriment to this pedal. The effects parameters are split up into 3 pages with 3 parameters per page. They did pack a lot of buttons and functions into this pedal though. The 3 rotary encoders are also buttons, and we've got 4 arrow key style buttons around the foot switch too. It's really simple to get your head around, and the UI on the screen is clearly laid out, so there wasn't really much of a learning curve to this pedal. One thing I will say is that it's worthwhile to hop into the settings menu and disable the autosave function. This means that you'll never lose your presets if you tweak them too far and don't like the results. Now, for this preset, I wanted to dial in a sort of unique octave effect. So we've got a noise gate, an octave, the MXR Distortion Plus model, the high watt stack, and the HD reverb. Now, after purchasing this pedal, I was informed by someone on Agufish's Discord that these pedals were able to be heavily modified via the software. You can pull up any effect from any of the other Zoom devices, the MS-50, the MS-60, the MS-70, the B1X and the G1X. The only caveat here is that the pedals themselves have a very limited amount of memory. I found myself deleting a lot of the onboard models to make space for new models. While we've got the pedal plugged into the computer, it's a good time to mention the third-party desktop editor ToneLib Zoom. Now this works well enough, though the USB port isn't grounded, so you do get a bit of interference and hum when you're using it. The editor is so much easier to use than the UI on the pedal, especially when it comes to naming presets. The dual rotary encoders to name your preset are an absolute pain to use on the pedal, when on the desktop editor you just type it in on your keyboard. The other issue I have with dialing in patches using the pedal itself is scrolling through the list of available pedals. Now, while they are categorized into the different effects types, you have to scroll through every single one of them to get to the one you want. The categories aren't locked off either, so they loop around. I found myself accidentally adding in amp models quite a lot, which introduced quite a lot of feedback and noise to the signal. Now, the editor is a third-party editor, so it's not as smooth as something like HXEdit for the Helix devices. It also doesn't know what pedals you have loaded on the unit, so sometimes it'll add a pedal and then immediately bypass it when the unit doesn't have it. So it can be a little bit janky at times, but ultimately it's not too bad, and it is quite useful to have. I suppose a good place for the review to start would be to see if it's capable of doing the things that I bought it for. What I was looking for was some nice modulation pedals to run between my fuzz pedal and the amp plugins on my computer. I was previously using Helix Native to achieve this, though the allure of having a single pedal that I can just smash on seemed too appealing to me to pass up. I'm using the Demiurge Doomy pedal for the main fuzz tone here. This is based on the Earthquaker Life, which is in turn based on the Rat. It's also got a little bit of an octave up blended in. The goal for this is to try and tap into some of those 90s grunge slacker rock sort of sounds. You know, easy to play leads that are sonically different enough from the wall of fuzz to stick out in a mix. Okay, so let's hear my tone before I engage any of the modulation in the unit. The first modulation I've got loaded up is a phaser. The second is the basic chorus. Third, we've got the clone chorus, which is based on the electroharmonic small clone. Now we've got the warp phaser. Finally, for the modulations, we've got a flanger. This isn't my favourite sound, but we'll hear what it sounds like. So one thing I found with all of these modulations in the unit is they're very extreme, very in your face and very fake sounding. I also found them quite hard to dial in. I have to say, given that that's what I bought this pedal for, I'm not super impressed, but we'll carry on with the unit and see if there's anything else in there that I want to keep it for. For the rest of this video, I'm going to be using amp tones from my board. This means that I'll also be running stereo into my interface. Let's hear how the stock amp models sound in the unit. Now, this isn't something I really bought the pedal for, since that's kind of an area where technology's really improved since the release of this unit, but we're going to hear what they sound like anyway. I've dialed in a few presets using the stock amp models in the unit. Firstly, we've got a clean preset. Next, we've got sort of a classic crunch sound with a clon up front. Now the next preset is a sort of djenty preset. Yeah, so as I expected, the stock amp models haven't really held up at all. These all sound super narrow, which I guess is largely attributed to the cabinet section. I think if Zoom were to re-release this unit, we'd likely see some impulse response slots, which would really open up the sound of the amp modelling in the unit. Now that we've got those stock amp sounds out the way, I'm going to switch over to my Mooer Preamp Model X2. Let's hear my new clean tone. Now, one thing I love about multi-effects pedals, especially ones in this form factor, is that you've always got weird effects available on tap. For me, that's things like ring mods, pitch shifters, and bit crushers. Now, these all sound pretty much exactly as you'd expect them to. If anything, the unit sounding kinda bad works in the favour of these effects. First, let's hear this octave pedal. I'm going to engage the golden horse on my board just for a bit more breakup. Next, we've got a ring mod. This sounds horrible, so be warned. Finally, for the weirder signals, we've got the bit crush. Now, this is actually one of my favourite sounds in the unit, even though it does sound pretty terrible. I've also been on something of an ambient kick recently, so I really wanted to hear what these reverbs and delays sound in the unit. One thing I did notice in the effects list is that they're pulling their sources from some very high places. They're copying stuff like Strymon, Eventide, and the Line 6 Helix. Those are some big shoes to fill, so let's see how well they do. We're going to start off with a really basic patch where I'm just using a little bit of tape delay and then some plate reverb. The next ambient preset is a bit more of a textural one, using the Eventide and the Streamline algorithms. Now we've got a chorus, a carbon copy, a pitch shifter which I'll engage throughout, and then the HD reverb. Finally, we've got a compressor, the ice delay, and the cave reverb. Now I did quite like the ice delay with the pitch shifter on that last one, but that's really the only thing I've actually liked out of this unit. Now that brings me on to my conclusion. I'm sure you guessed from the rest of this video, but I'm not really vibing with this unit as much as I'd hoped to when I purchased it. Perhaps the notion that older digital pedals just don't live up to today's standards might have some truth to it. Even with the firmware update, the mods, the hacks, dialing everything in, and spending some time with the unit, I'm still not finding it as nice as I thought I would. Now, unfortunately, that does mean I'm going to be returning this to its factory settings and then sending it back to Gear for Music. I will say, if you can pick one of these up used, it's probably worth it. So I paid £100 for this brand new, but on the used market they seem to be going for anywhere from £40 to £60, which for what you're getting is definitely worth it. Now, as with all things like this, the tones are all completely subjective. While I didn't like the tones from this unit, if you did, then that's completely fine. If you are in the market for one, keep an eye on the used market for the MS-60, the MS-50 and the MS-70, since all of the effects from all of them can be loaded on any of them. There are some minor differences between them. The MS-70 has stereo ins and outs, and the MS-60B only has the ability to load 4 effects, but other than that they're all pretty similar. So that's everything I've got for this video. I'm sorry that this one was a little bit of a downer. Hopefully I'll have a more positive review on whatever it is that I choose to replace this unit with. Thank you so much for checking it out with me. Until next time.